He invited friends over to his house for a party that lasted until late at night. However, even after the party ended, he still felt unsatisfied. The beer in the house had all been run out, so he decided to go to the nearby store to buy more. The weather that night was particularly cold, and he was worried that the children might get cold, so before leaving, he lit the fireplace and added a few more logs to quickly raise the temperature in the house. It was this warm-hearted gesture that made him regret every day thereafter. On his way back from the store, Lee heard the piercing sirens of a fire truck, and the sound seemed to be coming from his house. The fire illuminated the night sky, leaving only the framework of the house standing. His wife was crying out in anguish, as their 3 children were still inside. Lee was looking dazed at the sight, unable to believe that it was real. He was even holding the diapers he had just bought for his youngest son. The fire was only completely extinguished the next day. His wife, mentally broke down, was carried into an ambulance. Lee reached out to comfort her, but she turned her head away. Firefighters carried the children from the ruins. Initially in a state of dissociation, witnessing this scene finally caused Lee to break down and almost collapse. Overnight, he had lost everything. Their once cozy home was now a pile of rubble. Lee was taken to the police station for questioning. Before the police could ask anything, he admitted that the fire was caused by him. It turned out that after adding the logs the night before, he negligently forgot to put back the fire screen. Even when he remembered it while on the way, he didn't pay much attention. It must have been a burning log that fell onto the floor and led to the tragedy. Lee never made an excuse for himself. His heart seemed to turn to ashes with the fire. The police reassured him that he had only made a huge mistake.
Look, Lee, you made a horrible mistake, like a million other people did last night. I'm not gonna crucify you. It's not a crime to forget to put the screen on the fireplace.
Lee, feeling confused after hearing this, couldn't believe he won't get any punishment. Following the police out of the interrogation room, his steps numb and his gaze empty. When a police officer passed by him, he suddenly grabbed the officer's gun and pulled the trigger on himself. But he didn't realize that the gun was not loaded, and all the police in the station swarmed up and took the gun back, preventing him from harming himself. After all that, his wife chose to divorce him, and Lee had no desire to continue living in the town that carried so many hurtful memories. On the day he left, only his brother and nephew saw him off, and they were his last family members in the world. Lee arrived in Boston alone and found a job as a maintenance worker, changing water pipes for elderly gentlemen, changing light bulbs for immobile old ladies, and unclogging toilets for girls. He went through each day passively like a machine. When faced with deliberately difficult customers, Lee did not hold back and responded with equally harsh words, resulting in the customer filing a complaint. When his boss asked him to make an apology to the client, Lee questioned why and refused to apologize. Nothing in life seemed to matter to him anymore. He returned to a cold, cramped basement at night, his temporary dwelling in Boston, without a decent window in sight. Early one morning, when he cleared the snow in front of the door, he received a call from his brother's friend, George, telling him that his brother had been hospitalized due to a heart attack. Although he rushed on his way to Manchester, Lee was late. The doctor regretfully informed him that his brother had passed away an hour earlier. After learning the news, Lee lowered his head in silence. He even couldn't meet him for the last time. Then he followed the doctor down the elevator to the morgue. On the way, he remembered the day his brother was diagnosed, where the doctor stated that a person with such an illness typically had only 5 to 10 years to live. He never expected that day to come so soon. Seeing his brother lying in the morgue, he finally broke down, leaning down to kiss his brother's cheek for the last time and expressing gratitude for his care and tolerance throughout their lives. Afterwards, Lee signed and took away his brother's belongings. When he came out of the hospital, he faced a new challenge of how to break the news of his brother's death to his nephew Patrick. At that moment, Patrick was at a hockey training rink practicing. Seeing his uncle came, he sensed something was wrong. He suddenly charged towards an opponent. The coach intervened, but Patrick even yelled at his coach. The reason why Patrick suddenly lost control was because he knew that every time his uncle came to pick him up, it meant his father was in the hospital. He thought it would be as usual, just his father having a heart attack. But this time, his uncle brought the news of his father's passing. The coach apologized to him upon finding out and expressed condolences for his father's passing. Patrick then followed his uncle to the hospital to see his father for the last time. On the way there, he may have appeared resistant out of fear, but eventually he was persuaded by his uncle to go inside. However, he only took a brief look and then wanted to leave. This scene was indeed cruel for a 16-year-old boy. They didn't return home until very late. Patrick's friends came to comfort him upon hearing the news of his father's passing. They sat around and talked about Patrick's father, remembering him as a good and funny person who brought them a lot of joy. Everyone couldn't help but feel regretful about his sudden pass. Lee sat alone in the dining room eating, then went back to the bedroom to lie down and watch a game. Patrick came in and asked if he could have the girl downstairs stay overnight. Lee had no objections and didn't say much. The next day, Lee took Patrick to the law firm. His brother had appointed a lawyer before he passed away. However, when Lee saw the will, he was surprised to find out that his brother had appointed him as Patrick's guardian. Additionally, his brother had considered the potential financial issues of Lee becoming Patrick's guardian. He not only left Patrick's maintenance fees, but also left $5,000 for Lee to move. In addition, there was some extra money as personal income before he found a job. Despite this, Lee still felt inadequate for the role, and there were also two difficult problems waiting for them to solve. His brother owned a boat, but the monthly maintenance cost was quite high and the boat's engine was almost scrap. Lee wanted to sell the boat and move to Boston with Patrick, but Patrick wanted to keep the boat as it held many good memories with his father, the only memento he could keep. Then they arrived at the funeral home and found out that the winter ground was too hard, so Patrick's father had to wait until next spring to be buried. This meant his father would have to be kept in a cold morgue until next year. Patrick didn't want this, so he suggested renting a small steam shovel that could dig a perfect hole in 2 seconds, but it would cost extra money. They didn't have the budget, so Patrick reluctantly followed his uncle's arrangement. In the evening, Lee received a call from an unknown number, but the voice on the other end was familiar. He immediately recognized it as his ex-wife. She had learned about the passing of her brother-in-law and wanted to attend the funeral. Lee didn't mind and said he would let her know the exact time once it was confirmed. They then caught up on each other's lives. It was during this conversation that Lee found out his ex-wife was pregnant and due soon. He was suddenly at a loss for words. After a quick congratulations, he hastily hung up the phone. Everyone had moved on from the fire, but Lee remained stuck in place, tormented by guilt. The funeral proceeded as scheduled, with the brothers' friends in attendance to mourn. Lee stood in a corner, feeling out of place. His ex-wife also arrived, accompanied by her current husband. Lee's once calm heart was now stirred with emotion. His ex-wife approached him and they embraced tightly, but the embrace only brought more sorrow. Tears streamed down, and Lee held his head low as if in repentance. After everything was over by evening, Lee once again talked to Patrick about moving back to Boston, but Patrick made it clear that he wasn't going. All his friends were here, including his basketball and hockey teams, and his own band. He couldn't understand why he should leave for Boston, as his uncle was just a plumber in Boston dealing with clogged toilets and pipes. There were plenty of clogged toilets and pipes in Manchester. Why should he leave a town where he felt so attached? Faced with Patrick's questioning, Lee remained silent.